Welcome back to the confirmation class, and this is the last class for the Old Testament, the rise of Rome. So let's start with the Bible story video clips. Oh, here's the last one.
Ah, the Hebrew people, finally released from their Babylonian captivity. After years and years, they were finally free to return to their homeland. Of course, a lot of it was still in utter ruins from when the Babylonians took them captive. Still, the Hebrews moved back in and began to rebuild. They even rebuilt the Temple of Jerusalem. And then an angel of the Lord appeared before Mary to foretell the birth of Jesus, and then... one moment. I apologize. I must have skipped something. For a moment there, it seemed as though we jumped forward 400 years. Yes, that is exactly what happened. The Bible has 400 years missing from it. What kind of storytelling is that? That would be as if there was a story where Leonardo da Vinci is painting in the year 1500, and the next thing we talk about is people landing on the moon. It's that big of a jump in time. Well, this is a real mystery. We have over 400 missing years from our story. Who would steal time from the middle of the Bible? Like any good mystery, the answer is simple. The butler did it! Don't look so shocked, butler. Take him away, officers. Oh, are you wondering who those soldiers are? They're the Romans. Those folks are all over the New Testament. They're the empire that was occupying Judea. They took over during the missing years between the Old and the New Testament. Of course, before the Romans, the Maccabean Jews were in charge of what they called Judea, and they had taken over Judea from the Greeks. The Greeks, of course, had taken Judea from the Persian Empire. But back then, they just called it Judah. The Persians were the people who freed the Hebrews from the Babylonians and let them rebuild Jerusalem as an area controlled by the Persian Empire. All of this is missing from our Bible narrative. I could understand skipping ahead if nothing interesting was happening, but as you can see, a lot happened. Why on earth would you leave it out? We can read about the missing 400 years from the Bible in history books, and some versions of the Bible have writings called the Apocrypha, which cover these missing years. We even have writings from the Romans telling us what happened back then. But not even a sentence from the Bible. We may never know why the Bible does not cover those years. Perhaps those writings were stolen, or perhaps the Bible isn't meant to be a complete history of the world. Either way, we know one thing for sure. We can all sleep a little easier knowing there's one less butler on the streets.
So let's read the scripture for this class. It's Ezra chapter 1 verse 3. If there are any of you who are from his people, may their God be with them. They may go up to Jerusalem in Judea and rebuild the house of the Lord. The God of Israel, He is the God who is in Jerusalem. So as you know that they are moved to the Babylonian as the captivity. as exile. But now, through the Persian, they are released and they can return to their home. How would they feel? How would you have felt if you were a Jewish person living in an exile and just heard the king's declaration? You can go to your home. So, what does it mean to you to have the place to worship regularly with your people, like our church? Now here's a Nehemiah chapter 9 verses 16 to 17. For our ancestors acted arrogantly, they were stubborn and wouldn't obey your commandment. They refused to obey and didn't remember the wonders that you accomplished in their midst. They acted arrogantly and decided to return to their slavery in Egypt. But you are a God ready to forgive, a merciful and compassionate, very patient and truly faithful. You didn't forsake them. So it reveals God who is faithful to his people. And so Nehemiah is a leader of the Israelites who moved back from the exile to the Jerusalem. And he is the leader who rebuilt the city of the Jerusalem and the house of God in Jerusalem. And Nehemiah continually tells us God is faithful to you and to the Israel. And it implies that it is God who moves them from the Babylonian exile to the Jerusalem. But the interesting point is that after this story, after they move back to Jerusalem, the God story is stopped up to the birth of Jesus Christ. It is roughly 400 years. For 400 years, God is in silence. There's a gap. The story of the Old Testament takes us about the 3rd century BCE. It is the story when they returned to the Israel, as the Persian Empire was weakening. But the New Testament begins in the 1st century of CE with the story of the birth of Jesus Christ. So, what was going on in between? Did anything important happen? So, what would be your answers for where was God in those 400 years? Hi, Alan. And you can fill in the blanks on the page 57 in the middle. So there are some missing spellings in them. So try to fill the blanks and what would be your answers for that? Now let's move to page 58. So this is the history that we can find those 400 years. And we can divide or categorize the story into 3 parts about the movements of the nations. So there was the Babylonians who take the Israelites to the exile, and the Babylonian was took over by Persian. And the Persian was the nations or the country who sent the Israelites back to their homeland, Jerusalem, and let them rebuild the temple and the city. And there was the Greek, the Hellenism cultures, and the Roman Empire when Jesus was born. So, when have you seen something beautiful fall apart because of outside pressure? Think about this question. And we can find the another categories about the city and the temple. So the temple was destroyed by Babylonians, and the Persians let them came back to the Israel and allowed them to return and rebuild the temple. And the temple was reclaimed, and finally temple was completely rebuilt by the king Herod. Herod the Great, the Roman ruler who was not Jewish, completely rebuilt the temple from the ground up. Why would this have been surprising for the Jewish people? Because Herod was not Jewish, but he helped them to rebuild the temple. But was trying to get the popularity and for his rulership. And at the same time, there are people. And actually, there are really diverse kinds of thoughts among them. The Pharisees, a group of religious elite, they were dedicated to keeping the Torah, the 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis to Deuteronomy, and following the rituals of the law carefully and exactly. As they gained more power, the religious elite also were subject to corruptions. And there was a Saudis, another group of religious elite. They were politically adept and frequently allegiant themselves in the Roman Empire. And there was Essence. Some people felt that there was no way to learn to live under the emperor, so they flee from the emperor. And there was a zealot. They were trying to revolt against the Roman Empire. And there was Hellenistic Jew who adopt the culture of the Greek to their lives. And there was ordinary people. So here we can find there is really diverse history when there was in silence in the Bible between the Old and New Testament. But even though there's no story from the Bible, can we say God is doing nothing? It is a really important question that we need to ask. And as we see through the story of the Esther, sometimes we feel God is in silence, but God is under the mask. It is same for here. For 400 years, it seems like that God is in silence, but God is still working. God was in the preparations for the baby of Jesus Christ. And that is a story that we will look for from the next class, the New Testament. So, changing cultures. So throughout the long history for the 400 years, we cannot say there is nothing, but there was continuous kind of history and the changing of the cultures. The 400 years between the Old and New Testament shaped the government, religious structures like based on the temple, and the government, as you can see, the empires, and the culture Jesus was born into. If Jesus were alive right now, what part of our society do you think he would push against or work to change? So, Jesus Christ was the one who was stand against the Roman Empire by bearing the cross. He was not follow the cultures of Roman Empire, which says the power is based on power. But Jesus shows his power through the death on the cross. And at that time, the religious, which was based on the building of the temple, not based on God, they were corrupted. So Jesus stand against it. If Jesus is living now, what is the religion, what cultures, or government he would stand against? Think about this question. And how does when and where we live impact what we will live? So we have lived in a different society than people who are 100, 200, 300 years ago. that gives the kinds of change or differentiate our belief. So, how does when and where we live impact what we believe? Think about these questions as the last questions for the Old Testament. And see you at the next class for the New Testament. Bye bye.